come on live tonight and talk about TV and movies and some thoughts that I've been having lately. I'm going to get my Instagram going here. Perfect. All right, so I wanted to come on and just talk about film and TV a little bit and talk about some thoughts that I'd had lately. It came up because Vince Gilligan gave a speech at the WGA Awards just about a week ago, and I saw a little clip of it on Instagram, and I posted it to my story along with a comment, and several people sent me a message wanting to have some discussion on it. So I thought it was worth sharing some broader thoughts that I don't have to type out one by one to just a few people. But basically, his speech, it wasn't even really a speech. It was he was kind of talking. Seems like maybe after the fact. I found a longer version of it, or a longer alternate version of it, or something where he was speaking after the speech or something. Anyway, it was still at the WGA, but he was just sort of speaking off the cuff to press and things that were there. And he was just sort of lamenting that maybe we've made villains too sexy. You know, maybe we've made it cool to be a villain, and that has had an effect on the culture, and turning the culture into, a bunch of villains, a bunch of people who are against each other and sort of fighting each other. And the clip that I saw on Instagram I thought was very interesting because he rattles off a list of some of these, villains that have been in some modern shows. And it was interesting to me because he didn't mention Walter White, which Vince Gilligan is the creator of Breaking Bad. Walter White's the quintessential example of it. And I thought surely this clip is in the context of acknowledging Walter White was a baddie, And in the longer version that I watched earlier this evening, he does specifically, obviously, mention Walter White. And somebody in the audience says, yeah, but you weren't telling us to be like Walter White. And he says, no, of course not. Obviously not. Clearly, Walter White was presented as a villain. He was not lauded as someone you should aspire to be. But it highlights, he sort of arrives at something that I've always felt, particularly about Breaking Bad, but really just in general about a lot of modern stuff, which is has to do with making a villain your protagonist, a main character, essentially. So if you remember from high school English class, your protagonist is usually the person that you're following along, through the story, and they are going to go through some kind of change over the structure of the story. If they come out sort of better at the end, then the idea is they are, it's like a comedy in the Greek sense. And if they come out worse off in the end, if the resolution is a failure of some kind, downfall of some kind, then it is a tragedy, in the Greek sense, in the Greek play sense. And so a lot of these villain stories are meant to be tragedies, meant to show if you behave like this, these awful things are going to happen to you and the people you care about and that sort of thing. So I just find it interesting because when you put a villain in the role of the protagonist, especially in a television series, it's a little different in a movie, but in a television series especially, you cannot help but marry your viewer to their point of view. Now, again, in a film, this can be very productive because you're trying to sort of take them along the path and show them where this is going to end up if you keep going in this direction. But with the television series, it's very different because it's week after week. It's 100+ hours of this person being the worst person you've ever seen, And look, I know everyone loves Breaking Bad. I like Breaking Bad a lot. It's an extremely well-made television program, extremely well-made show. I like it a lot. I don't like it as much as everybody else did. And I didn't really get why everyone was so crazy over it. It's really good, but it's not the best. I don't think it's the best show ever on television. The episode Ozymandias from season 5 is, I think, rated the highest television episode of anything ever on IMDb. I think it's like a 10 out of 10, which there's almost nothing on IMDb that's 10 out of 10. And I don't even think it's the best episode of season 5. So, I'm in the minority, right? Clearly revenue and IMDb ratings show that I'm the one who's wrong. But I'm not. I'm not. I'm confident in my assertions. And my assertions are this. So here are the two big problems that I had with Breaking Bad. Let's start there. So the first one is what Vince Gilligan addresses sort of in this speech: the fact that the villain is the hero, because you cannot follow this person along for 100+ hours and not empathize with them in some way. And you want to create an empathetic villain, a villain that's just sort of straight villainous is doesn't always make a good story, But when you make him the main character like that, you really marry your viewership to this character and to the choices that they're making and to their aims and things. And there's a sort of a persuasion principle, this idea that the more you think about something, the more it rises in importance in your mind. And so when you watch 100+ hours of someone being horrible and thinking they're the hero of their own story, right? Thinking they're doing what they need to do to take care of their obligations, then you start to empathize with that. I mean, you can't tell me you didn't watch Breaking Bad and often root for him to not get found out by Hank, the cop on the show, right? It was one of his family members. That you didn't root for him to win out over the other cartel members. Perhaps you even justified it by saying, well, the cartel members, they're even worse. And so it's okay for me to root for Walter White. I mean, the show is just sort of engineered to kind of root for Walt, even though he's the villain. He's the bad guy. I had a problem with that in the very beginning. I didn't understand why everyone else really loved it. I'm like, why do you love this show that's about this really horrible person? I mean, I get that it's trying to show that he's horrible, but it really has the opposite effect. And again, Vince Gilligan mentions this in this speech, but I'm surprised that he's only just now sort of starting to realize it as he sort of looks around at a very divisive culture, which is many other factors besides just the television programs that we're watching. But that is a huge factor. The media that we consume of all kinds. And I'm surprised that he seems to just now be sort of realizing this. In fact, when he says we need more heroes on TV, we need more good, solid heroes, he starts rattling off people like George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life and Andy Taylor from the Andy Griffith Show. These are the guys that he really thinks are really good stand-up guys that we need to emulate. People obviously very unlike Walter White, So I just find it interesting that he's sort of only now seems to come to that realization, especially since he's somebody who's had such a big influence in this movement to do that. He wasn't really the first. Mad Men came first, and the main characters of Mad Men, they're very flawed people, and the show explores their flaws. And the show does this in really small ways. So you see them drinking a lot. I think at the time that Mad Men came out, I forget the year, but I mean, it was longer ago than you think. And I would say probably at that time, if you asked what's a man's drink, it would be beer. It'd be like a Guinness, like a dark beer. That would be like a man's drink. What is it now? You go look at any Christmas list for a man, and it's all whiskey, bourbon. I mean, that's the influence of Mad Men. I mean, I don't know where else that came from. The only people I knew that drank bourbon at the time that Mad Men, before Mad Men came out, were alcoholics. That's the only people that I knew that drank it. And now it's everywhere. And now it's like wine. It's like you can be an aficionado of these things. And episode 1 of Mad Men, I think it's episode 1, he has the bartender make him an old fashioned, something that had almost gone out of style, and now it's a very popular drink. And so just by having it on the program, and John Hamm he's a good looking dude, and he looks so cool doing everything that he does, no matter how terrible it is, that it just makes it, look like an attractive thing to do. It makes it look like an attractive lifestyle to have, even if that means upping your alcohol intake, which is not a good idea. Don't do that, And so they unintentionally glamorized essentially alcoholism. These guys are drinking at work. They have their open bars at work. These guys are all womanizers. And you see the effects of that through the show. You see how it tears their families apart and all that kind of stuff. But still, when they're doing it, they're hilarious about it. They look great doing it. They look like they're having lots of fun. Even though you do see the consequences in other scenes, it's like, it is kind of like an ad for being a well-dressed womanizer, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's sort of what comes across. And they try to make fun of some of the conventions of that time. So you see, and I remember in one episode early on, there is the kids are playing, and one of them has a dryer a dry cleaning bag over their body, which, you know, now it's like, oh, it's, you would suffocate. That's a big thing. But now they're like, go watch some television. And meanwhile, the neighbor is sitting there smoking a cigarette, and then she stands up, and she's about, you know, 12 months pregnant. And so it has all these little flavors of things like, oh, remember when we used to think that that was okay? What crazy times. Glad we've moved on from that. But at the same time, when you put it with this really awesome looking furniture and these great cars and these great hairstyles and the fantastic music, and you spend a lot of time, you know, making the show look as good as possible, it's like you're just essentially making an ad for all this stuff that you kind of think is terrible, but you're showing everybody how cool it is. And you're doing it for 100 hours. You're doing it season after season after season. So, of course, people are going to want to do it more. So, I just never understood why showrunners didn't get that. Why showrunners didn't get, if I make my main character this type of person, it's going to make my viewers want to be that kind of person. I just didn't understand why they didn't understand that. So my first beef with Breaking Bad was that idea that when you make the villain the protagonist, the viewers end up rooting for evil, essentially. And, you know, Walt has no redeeming qualities. He's completely self-serving. Jesse, at least, like, starts to become a character who, wants to do better. You know, he tries to get out a couple times, and he wants to improve himself. He tries to separate himself from Walt. He tries to say, I'm not like you. And he really wrestles with it. That to me is like, I can sort of go along with that, because even if he doesn't make it, there's like some hope of redemption in there. I never saw anything like that with Walt. Walt was terrible all the time. All the time he was horrible. From the very beginning, from the first episode. That's my second beef. That's my second beef with Breaking Bad. That's the second thing I didn't like about it, is episode one, he's like, uh-oh, I have cancer. Obviously, I've got to cook meth. That's the obvious response to that, to finding that out, right? It makes no sense to me. I'm not saying I can't see how someone would eventually get to that point, but you're going to have to give me more than 15, 20 minutes to buy it. You know, and people will go, oh, well, but they say in the opening episode, like he's tried all this stuff and he's done treatments for his money and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, but you can't just tell me. If you just tell, I don't care if you just tell me. You have to show me. I have to go along for the ride to actually care about it, to really invest in it. You got to show me this stuff. In my opinion, Walt shouldn't have started cooking meth until end of season one at the earliest. Maybe halfway through season one, you can make an argument for it. He starts to dabble in it or something. But like, I got to see that downfall. When that happened in episode one, right out of the gate, I thought, well, I don't like this guy. I don't care about anything that happens to him. Everything horrible that happens to him, he deserves. And so why am I watching this? What's the point? What's the redeeming value of this thing that I'm watching? And I kept watching it mainly because everybody was like, oh, it's so good. It's so good. You just got to keep watching it. Just got to keep watching it. And look, it's well made. But after all the way to the end of the series, watching the final shot of the series, I thought, yeah, I still feel exactly the same as I did at the first, half hour of the first episode of the first season. Why did I watch this? Obviously, this is where it was going to end up. In fact, it should have ended up in a worse place than it did, in my opinion. The show normalized selfishness. And when you root for him, you root for someone who is manipulative and wants to take things over with power and might and wants the power for himself. He's selfish. He's greedy. And let's not glorify that. And again, I don't think Vince Gilligan did it to glorify that. In fact, he says the opposite. He says that this is I'm not glorifying Walter White. Don't be like this guy. But you can say that all day long. But if you keep putting an hour-long ad every week for 5-6 years in front of everybody, they're going to buy into it. No matter what you say outside the film, what you say inside that mise en scène, that's what people are watching for 100 hours or so. And so, I'm just surprised that he was surprised, because showrunners, they should know, So Better Call Saul, for me, was a much better show because it sort of fixed the two issues that I had with Breaking Bad. So again, the two issues are total irredeemable villain as your protagonist and the act one lasts about 15 minutes when it needs to last most of the first season, right? Better Call Saul sort of does the opposite. So first of all, to the second point, Jimmy becoming Saul, like you don't see Saul until like season 3 or 4, really. Like he's barely even mentioned for the first 3 seasons. And so maybe they waited almost a little too long with Better Call Saul, but I loved it. I love this really drawn out, essentially origin story, act one, that they didn't rush any of it. And what that allowed us to do was address the first issue, which is in Breaking Bad, Saul Goodman is a total sleazebag. And he's hilarious to watch, but when you're going to make a show about just this total sleazebag, he can't be just a total sleazebag for 5 seasons. Like he's got to have a character. He's got to have some backstory. And when you do, how did he become Saul Goodman? Now what you're getting into is you're getting in the fall of somebody who's going to fall into becoming Saul Goodman. So he's got to start from some other place, right? And they really did this very well. I think they really did this right. So Saul is now Jimmy, and Jimmy, he's a con man, you know. He's a petty con man, but he's got redeemable qualities. You can see him questioning when he's pulling something over on a certain kind of person. You can see him wanting to help the people that he cares about. You can see him being hurt when the people he cares about hurt him or disrespect him. And I really like Better Call Saul. I like Better Call Saul a lot better than I like Breaking Bad. And I like Breaking Bad. I'm not saying I didn't like Breaking Bad. I liked it a lot. But I like Better Call Saul a lot better because I thought it did those character things much better. And so even wherever Better Call Saul ends up, comedy or tragedy in the Greek sense, I feel like every episode there is this wrestling with who will I become. That I think works really well over a television series. Whereas somebody who's just constantly evil for 100 hours, I don't think works at all. So I can't root for an instant villain. I can root for Jimmy because there's something in there, and even just in his love relationship, there's something in there redeemable that's worth rooting for, you know. So 2 other sort of semi-related examples that I think do these kinds of things really well. So one thing that I think about when I'm having this discussion is Training Day, the movie Training Day. Now again, this is a movie, so it's not a television series. So I feel like you can do a tragic downfall of a villain story in a film a lot easier than you can in a television series. When I say easier, I mean without sort of accidentally duping your audience into wanting to be the villain, right? So Training Day starts out, Ethan Hawke's character is he's been a police officer for a while, but now he's a new partner with Denzel Washington's character, who's been on this beat for however long. And it's like DEA, drug enforcement, something like that. It's been years since I've seen the film, so forgive my general description of things, which may be incorrect. But Denzel Washington's character does things his own way, right? And this makes Ethan Hawke's character, who's just sort of come off the street beat, not just a couple years out of the academy or whatever, he's saying, no, wait a minute, that's not the way that we're supposed to do this. And Denzel's character's explanation is basically, no, on the street you have to do it that way. That's the way to do it for the normies, right? But in the world that we're dealing in, we're dealing with a whole different thing. We're dealing with something completely different. And you can't follow those rules here because you'll get killed, other people will get killed, and these guys they don't care about anything. They'll just roll right over you. So you got to do it this way. I've learned how to do this. You need to learn from me. And so Ethan Hawke's character goes along with it. And they have many conversations like this throughout the film. And this film sort of progresses, each one getting more and more serious. And every time Denzel's explanation is basically, no, I've learned how to do this. Let me show you. And this is why you do it. And then they do it. And you see, oh, he's right. That's the way you got to do it. And his reasoning is pretty sound. It's like very justifiable. It makes sense, you know. And it goes all the way basically to the end of the film where something serious is about to happen. He's going to go kill somebody or something. I can't remember what it is. And finally, Ethan Hawke's character just draws a line in the sand and says, no, I'm not doing that. And I remember when Ethan Hawke's character does that, I felt sort of ashamed because I was like, oh, I was about to go along with it. I was like, yeah, go in there and get him, you know. I mean, it's just a movie. In real life, I might have different opinions about these things. So you're watching a movie, you kind of get conned into it. You kind of let yourself get conned into it. But I just remember thinking, oh, I was about to go along with that. You're right. That is terrible. No, don't do that, you know. And so Denzel Washington's character just absolutely explodes. And this is where he has that King Kong speech where he's out in the cul-de-sac yelling at the whole neighborhood. And everybody sort of comes out and looks at him, watches him have this meltdown, and he loses everything that he's built, essentially. He loses the respect of everybody, all of his informants and everything, as well as his partner. The whole thing is over, and you see it collapse and break down. And it works so well. Now, number one, Ethan Hawke's character really is the protagonist. Even though Denzel is the big presence, and Ethan Hawke's character is just sort of a lens through which we're viewing the story. Ethan Hawke's character is the one that goes through a positive change. Denzel's character definitely goes through a change. So you could argue, well, he's the main character. He goes through this big change. We're just seeing the story through Ethan Hawke's character. Denzel's character is actually the main character. And okay, let's say that that's the case. Still, it works because it's a movie. It's not 100 hours of watching this guy be the most terrible person, right? And as a film, it has a very specific goal from beginning to end. There's no thought of what will come after. It's not like a television series where you're just sort of keeping different plot lines and different themes and sort of stuff ongoing. In a film, you've got sort of one set of goals, and you know that before you begin the adventure of compiling everything that you need to make the film. And so the goal here is to take the audience literally on a ride on this training day and go deeper and deeper and deeper with this guy who's off the rails until finally Ethan Hawke has this realization, says, no, I'm not doing that anymore, and stands up for himself. And then you see him completely fall off the rails. And that's the goal. That's the film. It's self-contained. It works really well. So even if in the first 2/3 of the film, you're like, he's kind of cool, I kind of want to be like him, that works for the goal, because the whole goal is, yes, but you have to see, no matter how enticing this is, no matter how tempting it is to skirt the rules or break the rules in these ways for these very seemingly justifiable reasons, you have to see this is an evil person. This is a person who has made evil choices. And I think the film does a really great job of that. Another parallel here where the villain is the main character is one of my favorite shows, Columbo. Okay. So what's beautiful about Columbo? Most people know there's two things that make Columbo a unique entity. The first one, everybody knows, that's sort of what Columbo is famous for. And that is that you see the murder happen in the very beginning. You see everything. There's no question who did it, how they did it. You watch the whole murder. Sometimes the whole first 20, 30 minutes, of the episode is just watching the murder take place and the cover up and all that stuff. And so you're watching the murderer do his thing and get away with it, or do her thing and get away with it. Well, then Columbo shows up. And so now the question is not who did it, because we know who did it. We just watched him do it. The question is, how is Columbo going to figure it out, right? So that's what makes Columbo fun. It sort of turns the whodunit on its head, because, in fact, the Columbo fans call it a howdunit, because we know who done it. Now we just need to figure out if Columbo's going to figure out how he did it, right? And so, that's the main thing that people notice about Columbo that makes it unique. But there's another thing that I'm not sure as many people have really thought about. I was thinking about this the other day. The villain's the main character of every episode. The murderer is the main character, because they're the person we're following along from scene to scene. Columbo comes into their scenes, but he's always sort of surprising them and like on his way out and one more thing. And they're always trying to get rid of him so they can hide something or go kill somebody else or whatever. And so when you look at it, just as each episode is just sort of as a standalone little movie, the main character is the murderer. And it's a tragedy for that character because they think they're going to get away with it. And Columbo always figures it out, right? And so, so this would seemingly be the same problem that we have with Breaking Bad, right? You have our murderer. Many times they're irredeemable characters. They're evil from the get-go. We haven't had any time to see anything redeemable about them. Right away, they're murdering somebody, covering it up, lying about it, And a lot of them seem like they were despicable people before they killed somebody. They're just sort of garbage people. So this would seem to be the same problem as Breaking Bad. But here's what makes it different. Okay? There's two things. First of all, it's one episode of the show per murderer, right? They're not the murderer every episode, it's not the same murder for the entire run of the, however many seasons of Columbo there are, 13 seasons, or it depends on how you count, I guess. But, it's just one episode. So every one kind of stands alone on its own. The only thing that binds all the episodes together really is Columbo himself. And so that's the second thing that makes it different than Breaking Bad is the show is not called Robert Culp. The show is not called Patrick McGowan. The show is not called William Shatner. The show is called Columbo. Right? The title of the show tells you this is the guy we care about. This is the good guy. And you have the classic roles of the murderer and the police officer, and where you're rooting for the police officer, right? Think back to Breaking Bad. The only character in the entire series, in my opinion, that had any morals or ethics or anything was Hank. Hank, the cop. And they go out of their way to make him the most obnoxious, unlikable character in the entire series. He's loud, he's obnoxious, he's corny, he's whatever. But he's the only character that has any morals. He's the only character I rooted for in the entire series. I know I'm not meant to, but like I didn't. What else am I going to do? I can't root for any of these other people. And so at least with Columbo, your cop good guy character really is the good guy. Really is, maybe not the hero per se, but he is the good guy, right? And so your hero in the story sense is the murderer, and they go through a tragic story because they have their downfall at the end. But it works because it's self-contained, so it's more like a movie instead of 100 hours of the same person being evil every week. And the title of the show, the framing of the show tells you Columbo's the good guy. He's the one we root for. We're not rooting for the murderer. We're rooting for Columbo. We want them to get caught, right? Yeah. So the structure matters, the framing matters, all that stuff kind of matters. And, at the end of the day, I totally agree with Vince Gilligan. I've been saying it, in private conversation for a long time. Not that anybody listens or cares what I think, but, when you make these villains the main character, you make people want to do the things that they do. When you make Walter White the main character, you make people want to be like Walter White. They think he's cool, and they think the Heisenberg thing is cool, and they want to, be like him, So, anyway, I think Breaking Bad is a really great show, and I like it, but I agree with Vince Gilligan. Let's have more strong heroes. Let's have heroes that that we want to be like. Let's put somebody on television that we say, I would love it if you would be like this character I made. That's what I would like to see. And so I agree with Vince Gilligan. I hope that the next series he makes eclipses Breaking Bad with his Andy Taylor, George Bailey hero character. And I'm going to do my part to laud redeemable people and lift up good heroes and all the stuff that I create as well. So those are my thoughts. Glad I could share them with you. And thanks for watching. I'll come back when